do you know that there are certain words that, if you speak them during prayer, can actually weaken your spiritual protection? Words that, without you realizing it, open the door for witches and those working against you to slip in and use your own faith against you. Most people pray with sincerity, but sincerity without wisdom can be dangerous. And that's the trap, because the very words you think are showing humility could be the ones granting access to the enemy. I'm telling you this because I've seen it happen. Strong believers suddenly struggling with strange attacks, unexplained setbacks, emotional heaviness that feels like it came out of nowhere. And when you dig deeper, you find that their prayers were unknowingly granting permission for darkness to interfere. When you stand before God, you are stepping into a sacred conversation. Prayer is not begging. It's not self-pity. It is the moment you align your spirit with His power, and yet too often people approach God in a way that strips them of authority. They speak defeat instead of victory. They confess weakness instead of declaring strength. They hand over the very power that God has given them because they've been taught that sounding humble means lowering yourself to the point where you forget who your Father is. And those 3 words I'm warning you about, those are the words that take you out of warrior mode and place you in victim mode. See, witches don't just work with spells and potions. They work with spiritual loopholes. They listen. They wait for you to open your mouth in prayer, and when you speak those words, it's like handing them the keys to your house. Spiritually, you are declaring, I am open to attack, I have no shield. And trust me, if you leave your shield down, something will walk through that door. They thrive on misusing your own faith language against you. That's why Jesus said we are to pray with authority, with boldness, and with confidence, not with self-condemning words that keep you chained. When you pray, you are in a courtroom before the judge of the universe. Every word you speak carries weight. The enemy can't win unless you give him legal rights, and those 3 words are exactly that, a legal loophole. And I know maybe you've been saying them all your life. Maybe it's how your parents prayed or how your church taught you to pray. But ignorance is no excuse in spiritual warfare. Once you know the truth, you are accountable for it. You have to shift the way you speak, the way you think, and the way you stand before God. Most people think that as long as they're praying, they're safe, but that's not always true. There are words you can say, even with the best intentions, that strip you of the very protection you're asking for. I'm talking about phrases that sound harmless, maybe even humble, but in the spiritual realm, they're like lowering your shield in the middle of a battlefield. You don't see the arrow coming because you think you're in a safe space with God, but the enemy hears those words too. Prayer isn't just a private conversation. It's a declaration into the spiritual atmosphere. Every word you release either fortifies your defense or tears it down. And when you speak words of weakness, of self-defeat, you're essentially announcing, I'm unarmed. Witches, demonic forces, they look for that moment. They can't create your vulnerability, but they can exploit it the second you hand it over. That's why you have to be intentional with every word you speak in prayer. You're not just talking. You're setting the terms of your own spiritual safety. Witches don't always work the way movies show you. No flying brooms, no cartoon cauldrons. The real danger is far more subtle and far more strategic. They operate in the shadows, watching and listening for any crack in your spiritual armor. They study your habits, your patterns, and yes, even your prayers. When you speak words that signal fear, hopelessness, or defeat, they see it as an opening. It's like leaving your front door unlocked in a dangerous neighborhood. They don't have to force their way in. You've already given them the access they need. And the scariest part is that they'll use your own faith language against you. They twist your words, take them before the spiritual courts, and claim legal grounds to act against you. You think you're pouring your heart out to God, but they're taking notes, waiting for the moment to strike. This is why you must pray with precision and strength, because every word is either building a fortress around you or inviting an attack straight into your home. When you stand before God in prayer, you need to understand exactly where you are and who you are. Too many people approach prayer like they're crawling into the throne room, begging for scraps, hoping God might glance their way if they sound desperate enough. That's not how a child of the King operates. You're not a powerless beggar. You are an heir to a kingdom that cannot be shaken. The moment you accepted Christ, you were given access, authority, and a position in the family. That means when you speak to God, you speak as someone with a right to be there, someone whose voice matters, someone whose words carry the weight of identity. But the enemy knows that if he can convince you to approach God from a place of desperation instead of dominion, you'll pray from weakness, not strength. And prayers from weakness often sound like surrender, not to God's will, but to the enemy's attacks. I've seen this play out over and over again. A person in crisis, on their knees, pouring out their heart to God, but the language is soaked in fear. God, I'm so weak. God, I can't handle this. God, I'm just a sinner and I'm worthless. They think this is humility, but it's not. It's a public announcement in the spiritual realm that they've forgotten their authority. Humility is knowing your strength comes from God, but authority is knowing He has already given you the power to stand. The two are not opposites, they work together. If you only focus on being humble without standing in your authority, you've just handed the microphone to the enemy. You've told him, I don't believe I can fight this, so go ahead and push harder. Witches and those operating in the dark understand this far better than most believers do. They rely on your lack of confidence in prayer. They wait for you to use words that minimize your position, that make you sound like a servant begging for mercy instead of a son or daughter standing on promises. And when you pray like that, you might as well be saying, I'm leaving my sword on the ground, because what is prayer if not a weapon? You've been given authority to bind, to loose, to declare truth over lies, to speak protection into existence not because you're special in yourself, but because you carry the name above all names. The spiritual realm responds to that authority, but if you don't claim it, the silence will be filled by someone else's voice, and it won't be God's. When you start to truly understand your position, everything about the way you pray changes. You stop repeating empty phrases and start speaking targeted, intentional declarations. You stop begging for what you already have and start thanking God for it, as if it's already in your hands because spiritually it is. You stop telling God how big your problems are, and you start telling your problems how big your God is. This isn't just positive thinking. It's aligning yourself with spiritual truth. The Bible doesn't tell us to approach the throne trembling in terror. It says to come boldly, to come with confidence, to come as someone who knows they belong there. Think about it. If a soldier in battle threw down their weapon, hung their head, and told their commander, I can't fight, I'm useless, I'm too weak, what would happen? The enemy would advance immediately, sensing there's no resistance. But if that soldier stood tall, weapon ready, declaring, I'm here, I'm trained, and I'm ready to fight, the enemy thinks twice before making a move. Prayer works the same way. When your words in prayer are filled with strength, gratitude, and authority, the atmosphere shifts. Darkness hesitates, the enemy backs off, and the spiritual forces aligned against you realize you are not an easy target. Here's the truth that a lot of people miss. God doesn't need to be convinced to bless you or protect you. He's already promised to do that. What prayer does is align you with those promises so you can receive them. But if your prayer is dripping with defeat, you're essentially saying, I don't believe those promises apply to me. That's exactly the kind of confession the enemy is looking for. It's not that God's power stops working. It's that your own words are pulling you out from under the covering that power provides. The next time you pray, pay attention to your posture, not just physically, but spiritually. Are you kneeling because you're humbling yourself before God, or because you feel crushed and powerless? Are you speaking because you're declaring life, or because you're drowning in fear? The difference matters. One posture invites God's power to flow through you, the other leaves you open to attack. You have to see yourself the way heaven sees you, covered in the righteousness of Christ, armored up, sword in hand, standing on unshakable ground. That's how you pray from authority, not desperation. When you shift into that mindset, you'll notice how quickly the tone of your prayers changes. You'll catch yourself before you speak words that tear you down. You'll stop giving the enemy sound bites to use against you. And most importantly, you'll begin to feel what it's like to pray from victory, not for victory. That's when prayer stops being a routine and becomes a force. That's when you stop being an easy target for witches and start being the kind of person they avoid entirely, because they know you know exactly who you are and exactly where you stand. The enemy doesn't always need to attack you head on. Sometimes all he has to do is sit back and let you speak against yourself. That's the danger of self-condemning language in prayer. You think you're being honest about your struggles, but the way you phrase it becomes a confession the enemy can use as evidence. In the spiritual realm, words aren't just noise, they're binding agreements. When you repeatedly call yourself weak, unworthy, or incapable, you're not just describing your feelings, you're building a case that darkness can legally act on. Witches, demonic forces, anyone operating in that realm, they look for those verbal contracts. They can't create them for you. They have to get you to sign off on them yourself. And most people do it willingly, thinking it's harmless, never realizing they've just handed over their own authority. Prayer is supposed to reinforce who you are in God, not dismantle it. Yes, God already knows you have struggles, but He also knows the authority He's given you to overcome them. When you speak the opposite of that, you're siding with the lie instead of the truth. Imagine being in court and your own lawyer stands up and says, "Yes, my client is guilty of everything the opposition says." That's exactly what self-condemning language does in prayer. It's you testifying against yourself. You may think you're just being real with God, but the enemy hears you agreeing with defeat. And once you agree, you've opened a door. This is why you have to guard your words so carefully, especially in prayer. Speak the truth of God's word over yourself even when you don't feel it yet. Replace "I can't" with "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Swap "I'm weak" for His strength is made perfect in my weakness. Those aren't just nice verses. They are legal declarations in the spiritual realm that slam doors shut in the enemy's face. If you don't change your language will change your life, and not in the way you want. Every time you pray, remember that your words are not just communication with God, they're also a battle strategy. Use them to win, not to surrender. In the physical world, ignorance might get you sympathy, but in the spiritual realm, it gets you hurt. What you don't know can still be used against you, and the enemy counts on that. Witches and dark forces don't need you to believe in them for them to operate. They just need you to be unaware of the rules of engagement. They look for believers who think prayer is just about reciting words without understanding the weight those words carry. If you don't know how spiritual authority works, If you don't understand how the enemy gains legal access, then you're walking through a battlefield blindfolded. And when you're blindfolded, it doesn't matter how sincere you are. You can still step right into a trap. I've met so many people who pray passionately but still live under constant attack. They assume God isn't listening or that they're not holy enough for their prayers to work, when in reality, the issue is that they've been leaving openings they didn't even know existed. They've been repeating phrases that sound pious, but in the spiritual realm are declarations of surrender. The Bible says we perish for lack of knowledge, and that's not a poetic warning. It's a survival manual. If you don't know the tactics of your opponent, you can't defend yourself against them. Think about it. No soldier is sent into war without training. No athlete steps into a championship without studying the game. Yet so many people step into prayer, the most powerful weapon they have, without ever learning how to wield it. They pray with emotion but not with strategy, and in spiritual warfare, passion without precision is a liability. The enemy isn't impressed by how loud you pray or how long you pray. He's looking for whether you know how to close the loopholes. That's why ignorance is dangerous. It doesn't matter if you mean well. The spiritual realm operates by laws, and the enemy is a legalist. If you don't know the laws, you'll break them without realizing it, and the consequences will be real. Knowledge is not optional in this fight. It's armor, and without it, you're standing on the front lines completely exposed. Every single word you speak in prayer has weight. It's not just air leaving your lungs, it's evidence, it's testimony, it's a record in the spiritual realm. Think of prayer as standing in a courtroom where God is the judge, the angels are your witnesses, and the enemy is the prosecutor waiting for you to slip. What you say can either strengthen your case or weaken it. When you declare God's promises, when you speak His truth over your life, you're presenting irrefutable evidence that aligns you with victory. But when you speak doubt, defeat, or self-condemnation, you're handing the prosecutor exactly what he needs to argue against you. And make no mistake, he will. The enemy can't override your free will, but he can take your words and present them as a contract you willingly signed. If you've ever wondered why certain attacks seem to have a grip on your life, sometimes the answer is hiding in your own mouth. You might have prayed in a way that unknowingly authorized the very thing you're fighting against. That's why you can't afford to speak loosely in prayer. Every phrase matters, every statement is binding. The spiritual realm doesn't take your words as casual, it takes them as law. When you speak faith, you are reinforcing a fortress around your life. When you speak fear, you are dismantling it brick by brick. This is why witches and those operating in darkness target your words more than anything else, because if they can't touch you physically, they'll try to get you to harm yourself spiritually through your own mouth. They know if they can manipulate your language, they can manipulate your outcome. So before you pray, remember that you are setting a spiritual precedent. Let your words be the kind that heaven records as strength, not the kind the enemy uses as an open door. The power of life and death is in the tongue, and in prayer, that power is magnified. If you want to shut the door on the enemy, you have to remove the 3 dangerous words from your prayers completely. Not sometimes, not when you remember completely, because every time you let them slip, even once, you're giving the enemy a crack to push through. These words might sound innocent to you, but in the spiritual realm, they translate into weakness, fear, and surrender. They tell the forces of darkness, I don't believe I have what it takes, and that's exactly the permission they need to operate. Witches thrive on that kind of language. They can't create authority for themselves, so they look for believers willing to give theirs away. You can't keep praying the same way and expect different results. If your prayer life hasn't been producing breakthrough, you have to change your approach. Strip out the words that drain your spiritual power. Replace them with words that align with God's promises and your identity in Him. Instead of telling God you're powerless, thank Him for the authority He's already given you. Instead of confessing fear, declare His protection over your life. Instead of speaking defeat, speak victory even if you don't feel it yet. When you stop using those 3 words, you'll notice something change in the atmosphere. Your prayers will feel stronger, more focused, and more alive. You'll begin to sense that you're no longer just asking, you're commanding, you're declaring, you're enforcing God's will on earth as it is in heaven. And the enemy will notice it too. Attacks will lose their grip. The heaviness you've been carrying will begin to lift. And you'll finally understand what it means to pray from a position of power, not pleading. But it all starts with discipline, guarding your mouth in prayer, as fiercely as you would guard your home from an intruder. Because that's exactly what you're doing. Your identity in Christ has to be the foundation of every single prayer you pray. If you don't know who you are, you won't know what you can ask for, what you can declare, or what authority you have been given. Too many people approach God still carrying the labels the world has put on them. Broken, unworthy, powerless. And they wonder why their prayers sound more like desperation than declaration. But when you understand that you are a son or daughter of the Most High, adopted into His family, seated with Christ in heavenly places, it changes everything. You stop praying like a victim trying to survive and start praying like an heir enforcing what's already yours. This is what the enemy fears most, not your emotions, not your rituals, but your awareness of your true position. Witches and those operating in darkness want you to forget that you've been given authority over all the power of the enemy. They want you to believe you have to beg God for help, when in reality, God has already equipped you with every spiritual weapon you need. Your identity isn't just a nice idea, it's a legal standing in the spiritual realm. The moment you speak from that place of authority, your words carry weight that darkness cannot challenge. When you stand in that identity during prayer, the tone of your voice changes. You don't plead for victory, you enforce it. You don't ask for protection, you claim it as a right. You don't pray hoping something might happen, you pray knowing heaven moves at the sound of your voice, because your voice carries the authority of the one who sent you. That's why the enemy works so hard to distort how you see yourself. If he can convince you that you're still the same broken, helpless person you were before Christ, you'll pray like it. And if you pray like it, you'll live like it. But the moment you step into your true identity, your prayers become unshakable, and the power behind them becomes undeniable. The posture you take in prayer determines the outcome you see in life. I'm not just talking about whether you're kneeling, standing, or lifting your hands. I'm talking about the posture of your spirit. You can kneel in humility and still be standing tall in authority, or you can stand on your feet and still be bowed under the weight of defeat. The spiritual realm doesn't respond to physical appearance. It responds to the strength and certainty in your words. When you pray with confidence, when every sentence is anchored in faith and truth, you are building an atmosphere that pushes darkness back. But when you pray with hesitation, fear, and doubt, you're creating an environment where the enemy feels comfortable lingering. Witches and dark forces can't overpower you unless you hand them the advantage, and that advantage often comes through your posture in prayer. If your spirit is slouched, if your words are shaky, you're signaling to the enemy that you're not ready to fight. But when your spirit is upright, your voice steady, your declarations clear, It tells every force watching that you're not here to negotiate. You're here to enforce God's authority over your life. And the enemy hates that, because a believer who prays with that kind of posture becomes a threat. Your spiritual posture is shaped by what you believe about God, about yourself, and about the battle you're in. If you believe the enemy has the upper hand, your prayers will reflect it. If you believe God's promises are unshakable, your prayers will sound like it. And here's the thing: heaven responds to faith, not fear. When you pray from a place of absolute trust in God's power, you're not just speaking words, you're releasing weapons into the atmosphere. The right posture in prayer tells the enemy, you picked the wrong house to attack, and it tells heaven, I'm ready for what you've already promised. That's when battles turn, strongholds break, and the supernatural begins to manifest in ways that leave no doubt about who really holds the power. Prayer is the most powerful weapon you have, but too many people treat it like a last resort instead of their first line of defense. You can't hand it over to the enemy by speaking carelessly, by letting fear dictate your words, or by repeating phrases that strip you of authority. Think about a soldier on the battlefield. Would they ever toss their weapon to the enemy and walk away? Of course not, but in the spiritual realm, believers do it every day when they pray without discernment. Witches and forces of darkness can't steal your weapon. They have to trick you into laying it down, and the easiest way to do that is to get you to pray in a way that works against you instead of for you. Every time you pray, you're either loading your weapon with ammunition or handing it over unloaded. When you speak God's word, when you declare His promises, you're firing shots that the enemy cannot block. But when you fill your prayers with doubt, fear, and defeat, you're placing your weapon in the wrong hands. And once the enemy has it, he won't just use it against you. He'll use it against the people you love, against your home, against your purpose. That's why guarding your prayers isn't optional. It's a matter of survival. Prayer isn't just communication with God, it's warfare. It shifts atmospheres, breaks chains, and drives back darkness. The enemy knows it, and that's why he's after it. But as long as you hold on to it, as long as you keep it loaded with truth, faith, and authority, there's nothing he can do to disarm you. You have to protect it fiercely. You have to watch every word like it's a bullet in your spiritual magazine. Because when you pray with precision and power, you're not just defending yourself, you're advancing into enemy territory and taking back what's yours. And that's a fight the enemy can't win. So hear me, your words in prayer are not casual. They are commands, declarations, and weapons in the unseen war you're fighting every day. Witches, dark forces, the enemy himself, they can only work with what you give them. Stop handing over your authority by speaking weakness, fear, or defeat. Erase the words that open doors and replace them with words that seal them shut. Stand in your identity, guard your posture, and pray with the confidence of someone who knows they are backed by the armies of heaven. When you pray like that, the atmosphere shifts, the enemy loses ground, and you stop living as a target and start living as a warrior who is impossible to take down.